Good morning, all. I'm one of the directors of Changing Chapters, and we're really thrilled to have you here with us this morning. It's a very important subject for us. Changing Chapters is also a very dear subject to my own heart. The issue of children who are grieving, who are suffering grief or loss, and as you saw in the publicities, 1 out of 29 children have lost someone in the course of any given year. And it's important that we understand how they grieve and how it impacts them. And often they don't get the support they require or need because just lack of understanding of what's available. And so it's important that these children are helped, their families are helped, so that they can lead normal lives, irrespective or regardless of what they're suffering. So today, hopefully, we'll have opportunity not just to hear from our very distinguished speakers, but also to talk about some of the issues, some of the, some of your own particular experiences of this sort of situation. So it'll be good to hear from you as well as understand what our speakers want to tell us about their own experience and their knowledge in these matters. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the Managing Director and Founder of Changing Chapters, and that's Mrs. Amy Frimpong Pafi, and she's going to come and just talk to us before our first guest speaker. Okay. Hopefully you have the materials and you have questionnaires there, and feedback will be useful for you to complete that for us before you go. Thank you. Thanks, Amy.
Distinguished speakers, Liz Morgan, sorry we are late again. I wish to apologize for that. One of our main speakers is now at the station and will be with us shortly, so there'll be a slight change in the program. I also wish to welcome Kerry. Blaise is our media man for the day. After the event or in between the event, he might approach you to say a few words. Yes, my name is Amy Frimpong-Pafi, as you've already been told, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of Changing Chapters to our first seminar and workshop on raising awareness of bereaved children, their needs, and the support children and parents and young people need. My hope is that this will not be the last, but the beginning of many seminars and workshops to come. Many of you have traveled from afar, many of you have taken time out from your work, and this shows that we're all interested in the subject, we're interested in sharing, we're interested in working together, in supporting children and parents and young people who are grieving. Bereavement and loss are experiences that we all share universally at different stages in our lives. However, they are the least and most challenging conversations that we all have. The response to death, terminal illness, disability, and other losses differs from person to person, and the responses to it also differs. However, it's a universal subject, and I'm hoping that after this workshop and seminar, maybe we'll be able to have greater awareness and be able to share and be able to support those who we care for in this area. Often, when there's a loss, children somehow are pushed on the side, and all the support goes to parents and carers and adults in their life, and their voice is silent. So another thing that will come up that I hope that we can take on board is actually how we can listen to them, how we can hear them, how we can support them better, and they can also talk about their feelings, support them and their varied feelings. Changing Chapters. At Changing Chapters, we offer crisis and long-term intervention, and we specialize in a triangle service This means we provide a holistic service that supports the child, the young person, as well as the caregiver, and anyone that plays a supportive role in their lives. We also work collaboratively and would like to even work more collaboratively with all agencies around the child and parents who go through loss. How do we achieve this? When we receive a referral from either a school or agencies or GPs, we conduct an assessment of the child, young person, or vulnerable adult, as well as the caregiver, to establish a collective need of the child's immediate family and the child or the young person. This enables us to work with the caregiver and the child, because we believe that when we support the caregiver can then be empowered to support the children. Or if we support those who work with children, then they'll be empowered to also work with the needs of the children. How do we do this? We do this through targeted workshops, we do this through counseling, we do this through small support groups. At the moment, you know that all these things cost money and also manpower. So I'm hoping that after the end of this talk, we'll have many volunteers. We need people to volunteer, we need people to donate, we need people to go out of the way to raise funds, we need people to come on board, and then together we can support children, young people, parents and carers. Thank you. I now hand you over to Liz, who is from Child Bereavement UK, and take over the workshop. Thank you.
Right, I'm going to try and do without the microphone. 21 years of lecturing, I think I can just about get it to the back. But you will excuse me a minute while I... Actually, I probably shouldn't have said 21 years of lecturing, because my technology experience is still limited. Well, thank you for coming out on this very interesting, wet and windy, and about to snow, I reckon, sometime, morning. My name's Liz Morgan. I'm going to spend the next 30, 40 minutes talking to you about a little bit about the charity I work for, and also about how children understand death and grief, and how we as professionals can actually help them and their families to support each other. 22 minutes, so in the last 22 minutes, a parent will have died, leaving a dependent child or children. If you look at those who have lost a grandparent or a significant person, that figure goes up. That's why it's important for us as adults and professionals to understand the impact of bereavement on children. If a survey from the Child Bereavement Network estimated that 78% of 11 to 16-year-olds have been bereaved of somebody who is significant to them. Let's turn that figure around. 22% haven't. But it's still not something that's regularly taught in schools. And on the reverse side, for parents, every day in the UK, 15 parents and children up to the age of 19 die, and 11 babies will be stillborn. It is something, as Amy pointed out, it's not actually talked about very much in our everyday conversation, but actually it happens, and there are families facing this sort of grief every day. What do you notice about that photograph? It's a large family. Anything else? It's an open coffin.
Different ages.
There are lots of different ages. This is a Victorian photograph in the Victorian times, children were naturally part of death and dying. They were part of the family, and therefore, it may seem strange to some of us, it was a time for the family photograph, and there they all are, around an open coffin. Children were not shielded from death. They actually were there in amongst it. It became something that they became naturally aware of. Today, many parents feel they need to shadow and keep children away from death. And therefore we then have children who perhaps don't understand how they should be feeling or what they're feeling when actually a bereavement occurs to them. I don't want to bore you with theory, but I just want to give you two ideas, and I've got some handouts of the theories. Everybody's bereavement is unique. There is no right way or wrong way to grieve. You will grieve in your own way, and children will grieve in their own way. But it's interesting and good to have a background to say, well, actually, let's just get a little bit of bereavement theory. And we've moved away a long way from Freud, who maintained that we actually detached ourselves and moved forward. And at Child Bereavement UK, we work really with two main theories. This is Warden's task of mourning, where not in order, but these are the sorts of things that a bereaved person will go through. They will first of all have to accept the reality of the loss. What's the first thing that most people say if you say somebody's died? Oh no. No, really? They need to accept the reality of the loss. That person has died and they're not going to be coming back. They need to process the pain of the grief. Even if it's somebody that they didn't have a very good relationship with, it will still be painful. And that can confuse some people. That can confuse adults as well as children. I didn't like the person, but I'm still sad, I'm still upset. And we need to work that through with them. The third area is to adjust to the world without the deceased. What's my world going to be like? For children, it's very practical. Who's going to take me to football? Who's going to make my packed lunch? Where are we going to go for Christmas if Granny's died? She did Christmas dinner. And lastly, it's to find an enduring connection with the deceased in the midst of embarking on a new life. With Freud, it was thought that actually, or he believed that we just moved on and forgot the attachment we had with that person. Warden says actually, we work and move on, but that person will still be part of our lives. They will still be there. And I know from my own bereavements, there are still times when I think, oh, I wish I could tell Mum that. Because that's you're moving on, but that person doesn't actually move away with you. They stay with you. This, I think, is probably one of the best models when we look at working with children, because although it's actually designed for adults, it demonstrates what happens to a child very, very well. Basically, after a bereavement, there will be days when you are loss orientated. That is when the grief takes over. It's the duvet day. It's the day when actually you don't want to do anything else but actually think about the person that has died. And slowly you'll be breaking the ties. Slowly you might actually not want to do the ordinary things of life, the water bill, pay the car tax or whatever. And it's a real sort of duvet day, and we call that loss orientated. Sometimes, on good days, you'll be restoration orientated. You will be looking at life changes. You'll be doing new things. You will be distracted from your grief. You won't be denial be denying the existence, and you might well be moving into building up new relationships. But they don't come in separately. You might be doing both on the same day, 3 or 4 times. And this is the oscillation, that line that's going between the two. Because we oscillate. We might have a good morning, and then actually something triggers us off, and we have a bad afternoon. So we can oscillate. And why we, as Child Bereavement UK, like this is that actually it demonstrates what children do. Because we call children puddle jumpers. Are there school teachers amongst us? Yes, right. Have you had a bereaved child who is 1 minute absolutely distraught, and then the bell goes and they can go out and play football? That is puddle jumping. A child will only take on board the amount of grief it can hold, then it goes back to being a child. So, and this really gets to adults. They'll say, well, we've sat down, we had this long chat about Auntie Emily dying, and then they said they wanted to go and play football. Is that right? Yes. Because for that moment, that child has absorbed what you've said to them and actually needs to move on. And so they'll go, play football, play on the trampoline, and then they'll come back, possibly 2 hours later, and ask you another question. Well, what will happen to Auntie Emily's house? So we call it puddle jumping, and that's really normal for a child, only to accept what they can do, what they can take on board for that minute. And as adults and professionals, we need to understand that and make the family members understand that. They will revisit, they will come back. And at some ages, they will ask the most interesting questions, because we believe there's no question that's wrong. They're just interesting. So, what about the children? How do we support children? A simple child that lightly draws its breath and feels its life in every limb, what should it know of death? That's William Wordsworth. And that's a poem about a little girl being asked, how many of you are there in your family? And actually there are 7, but 2 have died, so there's only 5, and her trying to explain to somebody. And that's really it. Those children will always know they've had siblings, or they've had a father or a grandparent. And it's actually helping them to understand what's happened is what we want to do. So how can we help children? We have to take on board, first of all, certain aspects of the bereavement and of the child. We have to think of their age and their understanding of death. And I'm going to go briefly through, and I've got a handout that just sort of gives you an idea of what a child does understand on the sort of developmental age range. The nature of the relationship with the person. What if that person was abusing that child? They will be relieved if that person has died. Perhaps they had a really loving relationship, but it actually was the next door neighbour. You know, they might have done the after school care. So that, even though it's a neighbour, that death may actually affect them far greater. The circumstances of the death. Was it planned in the way that somebody had a long-term illness? They knew that the death was the only possible outcome, and so there'd been preparation. Or was it the knock on the door and somebody being told there'd been a car accident? That will affect the child's grieving process. The reactions of those people around them. How is everybody else behaving with that grief? Is everybody just locking themselves in their bedrooms and not talking about it? So the overall effect on the family unit. we talk about bereavement and grief, it might be that after the loss, the family have to move. They're on a reduced income. They may have lost a load of support exercises because actually there's there have been a long-term carers coming in and out of the house. There's a whole impact. How many previous losses has that child had? Is it cumulative? And like what their culture and religion? Is it part of their culture that they're allowed to grieve? So this actually is just the same in dramatic form, but gives you an idea. So we're going to briefly go through this. Can you keep an eye on the time for me, please? Thank you. It used to be said that babies didn't understand grief, didn't understand that there'd been a bereavement. What the baby will understand is actually that's been a change in the care pattern that they've received. So somebody who is their main carer is no longer there. So between the ages of 6 months and 2 years, the child, and these are rough, because you all know who've studied child development, you can have old 2-year-olds and very young 2-year-olds. But we've just put these child development ages borders there just as an indication. So between 6 months and 2 years, they will be developing the object constancy awareness. They will actually have an idea of who's normally there around them and will start to miss them. They'll have mental images of the person and miss them. So what happens if that person dies? Protest, distress. They might withdraw from everybody. Separation anxiety. They may not want to be apart from those people who are now giving them care. They may actually have no interest in food or toys. They might search for that person. If that person regularly came in, say at 6 o'clock, that actually may be a time when they become very distressed because that person hasn't arrived. From 2 to 5-year-olds, they will have been establishing in their own mind that they are a separate person. They start to get interested in the idea of death. Some of you may well have had the experience of taking your children out for a walk, finding a dead bird, and then wanting a stick to prod it with, and just to see whether it, does it move? Is it going to fly away? They'll begin to understand that death is part of the natural order. However, they will lack the ability to believe that it's actually final and irreversible. That person's not going to come back. And heaven could well be a concrete place. We have many parents who sort of they keep saying they want to go to heaven on holiday. Yes, because for them at that age, heaven is likely, possibly, to them to be a very concrete place. So there will be expectations of return and consequent sadness, constant questions, that can get to adults as well. But I've told you that 4 times. Yes, but they keep needing to be told. They're testing to see whether you're actually giving them the same answer every time. Anxiety about who's going to provide their physical needs, who's going to take me to school, who's going to take me to football, what we're going to do over Christmas. If somebody has said something like, Nanny's gone to sleep, you might well find that you've got a fear of the dark, fear of going to sleep, fear of just being alone, because they've associated those words with somebody who's died. Toilet regression, physical regression, they might go back a few stages in their development. Again, attachment, clinging, separation anxiety. Even if they're left for a very short time, it may well be that you start getting the tantrums. And this is nothing to do with the terrible twos. This is part of the bereavement. There's always been an argument, even in our office, about when magical thinking occurs. But we've agreed to put it between 5 and 8. And basically, at that point, the child believes that they can influence anything. So we deal with families who come and sort of say, he thinks it's his fault his father had a car crash. And we have to work on that fact that actually, no, it wasn't your fault. But it's this magical thinking idea. They will be developing a conscience, so may well feel guilty about things that have happened. If only I'd eaten my cornflakes, Daddy wouldn't have got mad and wouldn't have crashed the car. So there's all this sort of thinking about, did I cause it? Along with that understanding of death. They will now understand that people don't come back if they've died. So what do we see? Fear of death of others. What will happen to me if you die, Mum? What will happen to me if my sister dies? They could be especially good. Parents report that they suddenly have the best behaved children imaginable because they're trying to make up for what they think they've caused. They could go into caring mode. They could want to care for the rest of the family. Or on reverse, they could behave badly because they feel they need to be punished. They could actually bury the sadness and just behave as if nothing's happened. And this is quite often what schools report to us, that actually you wouldn't think that anything has happened. And we need to work on that because they need to understand that they're going through a grief. And they might actually grow in years. They think they're big now, and so they can't cry. And so you've got an 8-year-old going on for 18. Between the age of 8 and 12, you've got the adult concept of death being a permanent separation. They will develop fear of an understanding of their own mortality, especially if a sibling of theirs has died. Quite often with a family, if a sibling has died, the work we do with that family could be the reassurance of the fact that just because a sibling's died, they are not automatically going to die. But obviously that's difficult if it's a hereditary illness, and we need to be very attuned to the family circumstances. And they will start to imagine how the death will alter their future. Who will give me away at my wedding now that Daddy's died? Between 8 and 12, they certainly will display adult grief symptoms, but they may actually display that in a childish way. Anxieties about their own health, they might very well end. It's a known research fact that bereaved children spend more time at the doctors, and it's particularly at this age they will have all sorts of illnesses, and they'll be in and out of the doctor's waiting room, and they need to be talked through why they've got the tummy ache or the headache. May well become preoccupied at school. That child that's looking out of the window staring at the grass may well be daydreaming about the next football match, but they may actually be thinking about the person that's just died. And school teachers have to recognise between the dawdling and the daydreaming and the actual processing of grief. When we get to adolescence, and we all know that living with a teenager can be interesting few years, it's a time of great change. They could well be feeling ambivalent. They're separating, they're probably relying on their friends more, and they're very much onto this, what's the meaning of life, and how the death is going to affect them. Again, very similar to adults, but will feel very inhibited about expressing them because they want to seem partly about being grown up, but also don't want to be different. They don't want to be different from their peer group. Lead to apathy, withdrawal, depression, express anger in antisocial ways, stealing, damaging items, and may well take the grief to be supported by their friends, which can actually put their friends in quite an interesting position, particularly if they've never been bereaved themselves. What we believe is that bereavement isn't an illness, and with the right help, we can actually support the family to support the children, similar to, as Amy has explained, what they believe. And actually that's really looking at resilience. What our work does is actually try and improve the self-esteem, to make them think that I am someone who can be liked and loved, that I have someone to depend on and believe in and support me. And hopefully that's an adult carer, that's somebody within their family or caring network that can help them. And they can do things really well and find somebody to help if I need it. So there are, they recognise that they can do some things, but there's always help outside. And so that's the sort of building up resilience, and us as professionals can help families build that sort of resilient network. A lot of what we do is actually led by the work we do with families, and so I don't apologise for putting some quotes. This is an adult saying or illustrating how most adults feel about talking to children. I don't think my son knows anything, but I'm lying to him every time I tell him how his daddy died, and I feel terrible about it. I don't know how to tell him, I don't know where to start, I don't want to hurt him. One of the things we do say to parents and to adult carers is there's no such thing as a silent kitchen door. And I'm sure working in the business we're in, you've heard we never talk in front of them. We always take it to another room. Little ears, flap, pick up 2/3 of the sentence and make their own third up. So actually what you need to do is to persuade the adults that having those conversations outside, out of their hearing, is probably not the best way to go. We need to set up open communication. So, when we're asked, how do I talk to a child about death? This is what we would say. To give enough accurate information in an understandable manner, so age-appropriate language, so that the child can answer how and why in a way that makes sense. Because they're going to have those conversations in the playground. I heard your dad died. How? What they're going to say? I don't know. So it's it's opening up the communication. So, point number one, can we get the adult carers to talk more openly with the children? Parents worry that children will ask more detail. But they only really ask what they want to know at that moment. So it's a matter of giving them answer to the question in an appropriate, simple, clear information, age appropriate. But they will come back and ask for more. They will build that knowledge up. A bit like puddle jumping. Take on board something, go away and play. 2 days later, in the car, usually just as you're pulling up outside school, they'll start another conversation. And this is another Rebecca Abrams in her book. The more information you have, the less room there is for myth-making and the many problems it causes. There is enough darkness already. When you can shed light on a terrible event, it's important to do so. Little bits that they can understand, because you are providing their answers to something that's absolutely terrible. Which brings me to another point. Professionals often say to us, actually, we don't know what to say, so we say nothing, for fear of making it worse. You cannot, believe me, make it worse. The worst thing has happened. You can make it worse, or you can make the child feel worse if you don't say anything. A simple acknowledgement like, actually, Fred, I don't know what to say, is all that child needs. It doesn't need a long sort of, oh, I understand, I've been there. You actually just need to acknowledge that that child is going through something. So, how do I talk to a child about death? Give the child permission to figure out what has happened by letting them ask questions as often as they want. Please advise your adults to say it will be really upsetting for you, but they will keep asking questions. Answer questions accurately. It's all right to say, I don't know. It's perfectly all right to say, I don't know. And encourage the child to share their feelings. Watch out for the tendency of the child to blame themselves. Try to nip that in the bud, that it's not their fault. And encourage the child to remember, to create those positive memories they have of the person. One of the things, again, that parents and school teachers come to us quite often is, and they will say to us, we thought we'd done this when his father died at 6, and we're back, they're now 10, and they started asking questions. That's perfectly normal. What I would say is think about it in that every time the child goes through a change, and at 10 they're preparing to go to big school, they have to tell their story again. They have to repeat. They're going to be asked, what does your dad do? And if your dad has died, what do you say? So they will actually ask more questions. And we often get children we've worked with at 6 coming back just for a few more sessions at 10 to answer those questions that they've now got, because their understanding is greater. So, acknowledgement that the shock of what's happened, reassuring the child they're not to blame, reassuring the child that life is worth living. Because a lot of them will say, I want to be with Granny. I want to be with Dad. I don't want to go, I don't want to stay here without them. Giving them as much time as they need to adjust to life without the person who's no longer there. Allowing the children to feel angry. And actually that's one of the things that, again, adult carers find quite difficult to deal with, the anger side of it. These quotes came out of working with children who've been affected by suicide and dealing with the social stigma of somebody who's been suicide. But actually they're the same for most children. This is how it works. Because it's the elephant in the room. It's we don't talk about this anymore. And actually, we need to. We need to talk about the elephant in the room. And out to the words of children, it's a struggle, but you can survive it. It gets easier as memories come in and the grief goes out. When they start remembering the good bits rather than just the bad bits. So, where do you find support for your families? Where do you find your support for your families? Let me throw that open to you. Yeah? Friends. Getting a supportive network around the family is really good. So if you're able to, in your role, to talk to neighbours or other family members, it's a good thing. You've got to remember that you are supporting bereaved adults, usually, to support bereaved children. So it is a double whammy. And therefore you need to look for support. As a charity, we believe that schools can do ever so much because they are a constant in the children's life. They're actually very much more able, they provide that continuity. And so actually a lot of our work is within schools, telling school teachers that even though it's not on the PGCE syllabus, they actually can support bereaved children. Then you've got a range of local agencies. I've put Bromley, but I know there's lots of people from different agencies, so forgive me if your agency isn't there. Winston's Wish has a website, that's another children's bereavement charity. In North London there's Grief Encounter, again has a good website. And then you've got local CAMs. If you think that there are other issues, there's more than just bereavement going on, that you might well want to do a referral to CAMS. But what we have been finding up and down the country is actually that CAMS tiers are now so high that very few pure bereavement don't get in. They just don't get in anymore.
They don't reach the criteria.
No. So, you know, that means that you as the family support worker or the bereavement counsellor, the health worker, is actually going to be, there's nowhere necessary. But do look and see whether you think there are other mental health issues moving on, because sometimes CAMS can be persuaded in the rare occasions.
Thank you so much, Liz, and thank you for certainly helping us to understand that bereavement is not an illness, and that when we understand better how children grieve, and when we understand better what strategies can be used to empower them and their families, then we can help them to be resilient. So thank you for that, and for sharing, especially for telling us we have to talk. Not talking is not an option when there is death and when there is loss. Children have to be given the information and helped through these times. Thank you so much.
If you want to donate or if you want to volunteer, you can contact us through our website www.changingchapters.com or email us info@changingchapters.com.